Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depends on where you are. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which tackle the Syria-US relationship after the historical decision taken by President Trump to ease all the sanctions on Syria. As we know, the US sanctions on Syria have evolved significantly, starting with the focus on terrorism and expanding with the Syrian civil war. The initial phase in the 2000s targeted Syrian alleged support for terrorism and action in Lebanon. The second phase, beginning in 2011, intensified due to the civil war, leading to border sanctions and restrictions. In June 2025, the US significantly eased the sanctions and authorizing transactions with the Syrian government institutions and lifting restriction on many Syrian entities. This is why the relationship between US and Syria it's a story of sanctions and sanctions. They started in 1979 when the Syria was designated as a state of sponsor of terrorism, and later on in May 11, 2004, the President George Bush, after the killing of Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri, signed executive order implementing initial sanctions. And then in 2006, 2008, additional executive orders expanded the scope of sanctions and blocked property of certain individuals in the Syrian government. And when the Syrian revolution erupted in March 2011, the US administrations under the leadership of Barack Obama imposed the first of sanctions was on April 2011. Sanctions were imposed on several Syrian officials, including President Bashar al-Assad. And then later on August 2011, executive order blocked Syrian government property and prohibited new investment. 2012, further executive order targeted human rights abusers and sanctions evaders. But the peak of the sanctions was 2019, when the Caesar Syrian Civilian Protection Act was passed and enabled on secondary sanctions. And then 2024, Bashar al-Assad regime fell, leading to a discussion about easing the sanctions. When President Trump take office in January 2025, the Treasury, especially during his visit to Riyadh, he announced that he will give Syria a chance and ease all the sanctions that's announced later on. As I detailed before, the sanctions on Syria has some executive orders and other legislation, which they need other legislation from the Congress to be able to be lifted, especially the Pentagon Act and the Caesar Civilian Act. But now with the announcement of President Trump of lifting the sanctions, lifting the comprehensive sanctions against Syria, including the waiver of some export control, it has a new beginning in the relationship between Syria and United States. To discuss such relationship and the future with this relationship, we have an extreme well expert on this regard. We will have Mr. Adam Abdel Maula, who is the resident coordinator of all UN agencies in Syria, who's been I know him for a while since we are at Harvard. Then we discovered very soon in Damascus that we live in the same street in the US. And he's been expert not only on Syria, but also became advocate to lifting the sanctions on Syria from the day one. We will come here and we will hear from him soon, but let me introduce others. Also, we have Marwan Qabalan, who's a Syrian friend, but also he's a director of the research unit at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. And then also we have Natasha, who's been expert on the US-Syria relationship, and she's now non-resident fellow at the CSIS. And we will join also by Majid Shurbaji. She is a former political prisoner and entrepreneur. We'll hear from her also from Damascus. But let me turn it out to Adam, who's will give us overview about what's the impact of the sanctions since he lived it. He was in Syria 2010 and later on, and now what the future implication of the lifting the sanctions. Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Radwan, and I'm glad to join this panel. Well, on the sanctions issue, my first observation, having lived in countries that suffered from the US sanctions, such as Iraq and others, my first observation is that sanctions generally hurt the people. They seldom affect the rulers. Why do I say that? Look, there is a long history of the sanctions regimes. We have seen that sanctions were imposed first on Cuba. But Castro continued to rule Cuba until he died of old age in his late 90s. When Saddam Hussein fell, I was among the first UN staff members to go to Iraq. And I saw firsthand that boxes of newly minted US dollars were hauled from his palaces and crates of whiskey and fine wines and all of that. While, according to UNICEF, around 500,000 children died because of the sanctions regime. That's an official statistic from UNICEF. Now here in Syria, you will all recall how the regime benefited from the illicit trade in drugs and the few resources that were available in the country were all pocketed by the regime's top leaders, and eventually they fled the country and took all of that money with them while the people continued to suffer. So for me, to make a long story short, sanctions hurt the people. They rarely affect the rulers. That's a point of principle. And the second thing to observe here in Syria in particular is that despite all the waivers that we got for the humanitarian work in Syria, the chilling effect of the sanctions made many vendors and would-be companies and partners refrain from doing business, even with the United Nations. That contributed to a great degree in impeding our ability to deliver optimally on our humanitarian mandates. Now, it is a huge relief that now the sanctions are being lifted, but I hasten to caution everyone that we should calibrate our optimism, because it will take time before the effects of the suspension of the sanctions, and it is a suspension, it is not lifting of the sanctions when it comes to the US, because simply the Caesar Act doesn't allow the president to abolish it. He can suspend some provisions up to 180 days, and that's what he did. 180 days is too short a time frame for any business entity that would like to come and set shop here in Syria and start operations and so on. So without a predictable timeline as to when the sanctions will be completely scrapped, I feel that many businesses will hesitate to come to Syria and start doing business here. So what we have observed over the past 5 weeks since the announcement was made is that many businesses are adopting a wait and see. Even Syrian businesses in places like Egypt and Turkey and other places are still hesitant to come back to the country. So this is all to say that it will take time before we see the results, the positive results of the sanctions lifting. It will, of course, be very helpful if the Congress accelerates the adoption of a new legislation abolishing the Caesar Act, and that will go a long way in helping the country and provide the predictability that the businesses would need for them to resume operations inside Syria. But overall, for us in the humanitarian community, we received this positive news at a time when the biggest donor, who is also lifting the sanctions, the US, has frozen its contribution to the humanitarian effort in Syria. Now, as we speak, the humanitarian response for 2025 that is seeking $3.19 billion US only received 7.5% of that amount. And that is mostly because over the years, the humanitarian effort in Syria was to a large extent dependent on the generosity of the US government. And now that donor is gone. And no one stepped in to fill that enormous gap. At a time when the needs have really grown exponentially, and several factors contributed to that. We began the year with a caseload of 16.7 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, and now we received more than 1.5 million returnees. Those include refugees and IDPs who return to their areas of origin, areas that do not have the basic social services to sustain these huge numbers of people. And then we got the drought, unprecedented drought, the like of which the country hasn't seen in 40 years. Then you get this fire outbreak in the coast. And over the past 2 days, this massive displacement that's taking place in Sweden. So it's like a perfect storm. And we don't have the resources. We may end up having sanctions lifted, but that will contribute very little in terms of easing the humanitarian suffering that the people are going through right now. Let me stop here, but I will be happy if there are any questions that I can answer. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. You raised very important points, of course, the degrees of the humanitarian assistance that Syria got after the fall of the Assad regime because of the change of the US administration. But at the same time, the coordination needs between the donors to help the different and the high expectations of the Syrian people they have on regarding water, drinking water, electricity, all of these issues has to be addressed. And now let me move to Natasha to tell us more about how the new U.S. government seen events in Syria and how the U.S.-Syria relationship will evolve. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you, Radwan, and thanks to the Arab Center. It's great to hear an update from Adam in Damascus as well before we begin. Because to be frank, the United States has been a bit absent on Syria for some time. And while we've seen this very shocking shift from President Trump that I don't believe anyone saw coming, I think Adam was probably on calls, I was on calls, talking about what would happen if the US never lifted sanctions or never even talked about lifting them. So, I mean, we're in a much better place, let's say, than I expected to be. So I'll start from that positive note. The question is why this is happening, I think was the question that was posed to me by the Arab Center. And needless to say, I don't think anything comes for free in this region, and certainly not with this administration. So, I mean, I think that, Trump met Shara, the new president of Syria, ostensibly, on May 14th. This was quite shocking, maybe even more shocking than his announcement that he was going to revoke sanctions the previous day. This is a former Al-Qaeda fighter, but it wasn't just that he met him, he gushed over him. He said he was an attractive guy with a tough past. The last time the presidents of the United States and Syria met in person was in 2000, when Bill Clinton and Hafez al-Assad were in Switzerland discussing efforts to broker an Israeli-Syrian peace deal. So I don't think that this is coincidental. I think that this particular president is quite transactional. I think that MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, gave him, very many deals that sort of sweetened sort of the cessation of sanctions pie. But I also think that there is a hope on behalf of the Trump administration and maybe those other people around him that were more doubtful about this new Syrian administration, that Syria might normalize with Israel, that maybe Saudi Arabia might normalize with Israel. My sincere hope is that none of this happens, I think, publicly at this time. I think for both of those countries, it would be very, very difficult, I think, for them both to proceed forward given what's going on in Gaza right now. And needless to say, and this is, I think, what I want to spend the rest of my comments on, the normalization with Syria or the normalization with Israel is not what Syrians fought and died for 14 years, right? So I think that we need to see a bit more from the United States on those issues, specifically on the issues that I think Syrians have shown that they are willing to fight and die for, rather than simply this sort of more artificial, superficial regional security architecture that that Washington has pressed forward with for many years now, not just with the Trump administration itself. And I think, finally, Adam's points about the fact that we won't see the benefits of some of these sanctions being suspended or lifted is quite real on the ground. And, part of that is because it's still difficult to do business in Syria, as Adam was mentioning. There's still this sort of hangover from sanctions, even those that have been lifted, even the export restrictions that have been lifted. But, furthermore, the things that people need on the ground, the entire healthcare system needs to be rebuilt, entire electricity grids, water and sanitation infrastructure, et cetera. You had 6 million people displaced outside of the country, millions more within the country, and many of those IDPs are now returning to their homes, and there's nothing there. There's no trees, there's no water infrastructure, there's no sanitation whatsoever, and so we're seeing an increase in waterborne diseases because people are going home, and there's nothing there for them. And it's wonderful to see these big MOUs being signed after Trump's announcement. But those MOUs are not going to, especially big MOU deals, on the ports, are not going to trickle down to people that are trying to rebuild right now. And so I think to Adam's point on aid in particular, it's a bit painful to see sort of the cessation of sanctions at the same time as the cessation of aid, because the reality is that Assyria today needed more of a Marshall Plan than, I think more avoidance in terms of assistance. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from Adam later about what he's seeing on the ground. But from my conversations, at this point, it's basically a GoFundMe operation in a lot of places where people are returning home.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Natasha. Now let's move to Marwan. Marwan, you've been following the US-Syria relationship, of course, since the 90s and later on at the beginning of the uprising and later on. Do you think the future of this having a new ground, or just, as Natasha mentioned, maybe transactional and does not put the real establishment to have good, normal relationship between Syria and the United States?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much, Radwan. Thank you, Arab Center, Washington, D.C., for inviting me to this timely webinar to talk about the role of the single most important actor in the Syrian theater right now, because as we all know, the United States has, although not very big, but important military presence in Syria, especially in the northeast of Syria, has significant leverage on the key players, regional players. I'm talking here about Israel, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, and maybe others, especially after the exit of Iran. And also the issue of the sanctions, because as Adam and Natasha have already mentioned, without the lifting of the sanctions, it would be extremely difficult for any government in Damascus actually to have any fresh start actually to rebuild the country or do anything, whether in terms of security, economic, or even the political process. But even though I was actually following US foreign policy on Syria for many decades, I was closely actually following it over the past 6 months, and it wasn't really easy for me to understand that policy, since it was full of discrepancies and contradictions, whether under the Biden administration or under the Trump administration. Because if we go back to the last few months of the Biden administration, we find that at the time when the Biden administration, and that is something that I believe the New York Times disclosed on last December, about the negotiations between the talks, in fact, between the Biden administration and the Assad regime hosted by Oman. This is when Brett McGurk, who is the Middle East chief supervisor at the National Security Council of the Biden administration, was actually leading that negotiations, offering the Assad regime a carrot, withdrawing the US forces from the northeast of Syria in exchange for Assad to distance himself from Iran and stop the corridor that is used to arm or rearm Hezbollah from Iran, Iraq, through Syria to Lebanon. But at the same time, and that was happening actually, it was shocking to me, that was happening even after the opposition factions took Aleppo on November 13th. But at the same time, I noticed also that when the Biden administration was having that negotiations or talks with the Assad regime, it was actually preventing the Iraq mobilization factions, especially those who are considered to be very much close to Iran, the so-called al-Hashd al-Wala'i in Iraq, from crossing the borders in order to provide support for the Assad regime, who just collapsed actually shockingly in the next few days. So here actually it was extremely difficult for me to understand how the Biden administration was thinking about the whole issue of managing the relationship with the Assad regime. On the one hand, having negotiations with it, trying actually to convince him to distance himself from Iran, and on the other hand, preventing the mobilization forces, factions in Iraq from supporting him or crossing the border from Iraq to Syria in order to support his forces. Under the Trump administration, the policy, for me, it wasn't less contradictory, because at the first 3-4 months maybe of the Trump administration, Trump hardly mentioned Syria, maybe once or twice, and it was mainly during that meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, when he said that he was willing actually to mediate between Turkey and Israel on their differences over Syria. And that when he said he congratulated President Erdogan for taking over Syria. When he said, "I know you took it," he said no, and he said, you remember that, that conversation. President Trump actually told us about during that meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. But then out of a sudden, everything changed. And we know that at that time, there were maybe two currents at the Trump administration competing over the formulation of policy towards Syria. One is led by the State Department, and the other one by people at the National Security Council, mainly by Sebastian Gorka and maybe the head of the National Intelligence Agency, Tulsi Gabbard, who were very suspicious of the new regime in Damascus, whereas the State Department was actually advocating a policy that would give the new regime a chance, actually, to prove that they have changed. But then Saudi Arabia, Turkey, they intervened, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar as well. They intervened with President Trump, and that led actually to tilting the balance in favor of the argument of the State Department. Let's give them a chance. And I believe it's not only about the shift of policy by President Trump. It wasn't only about the issue of normalization. I believe there are other intrinsic interests, US interest in Syria. One of them is we don't have an alternative to a Shia government or the HTS government in Damascus. There is absolutely no alternative. And the alternative would be an absolute anarchy in the country that could lead to a new round of conflict, that could lead to the re-emergence of Daesh, that could lead to a new wave of forced refugees leaving the country again. So it would be a new massacre if Al-Shara and his government fails for any reason in Syria. And also, I believe there is an argument now that is mainly advocated by the US envoy, Thomas Barak, who's talking right now about reconstituting the state in the Levant, undoing the consequences of the US invasion of Iraq, because the US invasion of Iraq led actually to the dismantling of the state institutions in the entire Arab Mashraq, in Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, mainly. And that led to the rise of non-state actors, that led to the rise of militias, armed groups supported mainly by Iran. Those armed groups and militias are hard actually to control. So let's put back state institutions. Let's support the central authorities, and let's begin with Syria. Maybe we'll move to Lebanon and then to Iraq. That would lead actually to further undermining Iran's influence in the region, and also to prevent the re-emergence of jihadist groups, because there is no single authority that can fight jihadists than former jihadists themselves. So this is where they see a key role for the Jawlani government, the Ahmad al-Shara government in Syria. And we all know that the rise of the jihadist groups like Daesh, for example, was very much a direct reaction to the rise of Iran's influence in the region. So it was like Sunni jihadists versus the Shiite ascendancy in the region following the US invasion of Iraq. So I believe these are the interests that the United States is trying actually to serve from its new approach to Damascus. Of course, normalization is also important, but I don't think, as Natasha mentioned earlier, that normalization is going to be something like something easy, as some people might imagine, between Syria and Israel. I don't think that any government in Damascus is willing to normalize relation with Israel without the returning of the Golan Heights, or at least the bulk of the Golan Heights. And we believe that Israel will not do that. We know Ahmad al-Shara now is pushing mainly for a security agreement with Israel that would entail the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the December 8th. We have now in Syria the 5th of June borders, and we have the 8th of December 2024 borders. So he's trying actually to pressure Israel to withdraw from the December 8, 2024. But I don't think the Israelis will do that, because the Israeli strategy has always been occupying a new land in order to negotiate for the old one that has already been occupied by Israel. So for the Israelis who are willing to withdraw from the December 8 borders, if the new government in Damascus is willing to accept Israel's sovereignty over the occupied territories during the 1967 war with Israel, that is something that's going to be extremely difficult for any government in Damascus to accept. So I don't see that even a security agreement between Syria and Israel possible under these terms and conditions. So we still have to wait and see how the Trump administration is going to be using the sanctions card actually in order to pressure Ahmed al-Shara and his government to give more concessions concerning the negotiation with Israel. That is a question for me is very difficult actually to answer at this moment. But all I can say is let's wait and see how they are going to find an exit from this dilemma over the next few weeks and months. So I'll stop here actually, and maybe we can come back to some of these points later during the discussion. Thank you, Ridwan.
Thank you very much, Marwan. Let's move now to Majd Shurbaji. She is speaking from Damascus. This is why I understand some difficulties in the internet. Majd, she's a former political prisoner. She's been detained for 7 months in 2012 under the Assad regime as a hostage on her husband. Then the Assad government, they arrested her husband and unfortunately is killed under torture. After that, she got released on a deal between the opposition and the government. She's been advocate on behalf of the victims and women rights for almost 12 years. She did not stop on that, but also she became entrepreneur, and she opened her businesses in Lebanon, focused on education, later on in Turkey, and now she has a big business in working on Syria in different areas. Hospitality, restaurant, schools, real estate. She's just an inspiring story for a Syrian woman to move being a victim into entrepreneur and to play a role in Syria's future. Majd, she will read her intervention now. Majd, please.
Yes, دكتور.
اتفضلي.
تمام. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today about my country, Syria. My name is Majd Shurbaji. I am a Syrian businesswoman and activist, and a former detainee who spent 8 months in the prison of the Syrian regime in 2013. My husband was tortured to death while in the detention and was released through a prisoner exchange deal. I was arrested for participating in peaceful demonstrations we organized in my hometown, Daraya, to demand freedom, democratic change, and the release of detainees held in Syrian prison. After the one minute. Okay. After the chemical massacre in 2013, I fled Syria with my children. I crossed illegally into Lebanon as the Syrian regime had stripped me of all my civil rights following my release from prison. Upon revening in Lebanon in early 2014, I founded a center to empower Syrian refugees, women, and opened a school for refugees children. The school remained open for 10 years and has only closed on months ago after what we consider the liberation of Syria and after the term Syrian refugees ceased to define our people forever. Throughout those years, I supported many women who had lost their breadwinners by helping them launch small business too. They called sustain themselves driven by my strong belief that economic empowerment is the gateway to political and legal empowerment for women. Today, I continue the same work and inside Syria, supporting women economically and helping them start a small business to stay can become successful entrepreneurs. The recovery of Syria economy faces enormous challenges. Syria today is not merely in a post-war phase, but in a post-state phase where institutions have been destroyed and the social fabric has been deeply fractured. Despite all the challenges, we are collectively striving for the recovery of your national economy and remain confident in your ability to rise again. Today, Syria is a raw landfall of investment opportunity in a country that has endured political isolation for more than half a century. In this context, I would like to shed light on the issue of reconstruction in Syria, given its crucial importance in revitalizing the economy, saving the Syrian society, and contributing to its recovery, particularly considering that over 90% of the Syrian population currently lives below the poverty line. Reconstruction in Syria is not merely an economic or engineering. It is a step toward restoring hope for millions of Syria whose lives have been shattered by war. Despite the difficulties ahead, the combined efforts of local and international actors can make reconstruction the beginning of a new era of peace and development. Reconstruction is not about rebuilding walls, it is about rebuilding trust. It is not impossible, but it's required a realistic plan that begins by attracting Syrian capital from abroad followed by opening a channel of cooperation with other countries. The true key is trust. If Syria fell, there is transparency, legal stability, and security capital will begin to flow back gradually. The Syrian market holds a great promise, which is qualified human resource and strategic geographic location making investment in Syria a genuine opportunity to jumpstart economic recovery. Regarding the lifting of sanctions, we definitely thank everyone who contributed to lifting the sanctions on Syria. This step will allow Syria to shorten the period of its recovery and renaissance, and it will enable a large company to enter the market more quickly. However, as I said earlier, the first step must come from the Syrian citizens themselves. As a businesswoman and a former detained, I was forced to be absent from my country for 12 years. When the regime fell, I returned to Syria after its fall. From the moment my feet touched Syrian soil, again after 12 years, I began investing in my country, despite the uncertain situation and the time. I started investing out of love and a sense of duty. Syrians love their country. They are hardworking people, ready to make every sacrifice for their country recovery. I believe that Syria alone are capable of contributing to the recovery of their economy by up to by 14%. However, it is essential to start with a clear action plan and a comprehensive economic vision that has a tangible impact covering most to the country population and is understandable so that everyone can engage in it. Development approaches my differ from one actor another, but Syrian must formulate their own approach, adapting the movement of other actors in their favor, and politically engaging with them in the language of interest, giving and taking in a way that positively reflect on the whole country. Hope exists and popular will is clear, but the success of this path requires wise leadership, broad partnership, and protection from narrow intervention and interest. I thank everyone for their kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Majid, for such very optimistic view for someone gone through a lot. And now let's go to the question. Since Natasha, she has to leave us almost at 12 noon, I will address the first question to you, which I think it's very important, because the transition in Syria is not only, it has domestic challenges, but has very complicated regional dimension. we've seen right now Israel been intervening. They saw the so-called on behalf of the Druze of Suwaida, and attacking the Syrian security personnel, Syrian army, who's trying actually to restore peace and security in the region. If you talk us more about the regional implication of such troubling environment, how the impact of such region into the transition in Syria.
Yes, sure, Redwan. I think it's a very important question, and I think Majid kind of proves my belief throughout all of this, that the thing that makes me optimistic about Syria is Syrians, and the thing that makes me pessimistic about Syria is all of the surrounding issues. And that's been the case, I think, throughout the revolution, the war, and so on. And so I think, my big concern is that Israel is not convinced. Maybe even the UAE is not convinced of this particular government. But they are not also interested in sort of a democracy or free and fair elections in Syria, to choose alternatives, because they might not trust that either. And so as a result, I think that, the US or European countries have a role to play in, I think creating positive regional competition in Syria in terms of investment and things like that. Marwan spoke very eloquently about, the issues with, Iran coming back or Russia coming back, etc. There's a way, there are ways to mitigate that and to increase their influence, but in a way that's positive for Syrians. And then there's a way to do it negatively in a way that that doesn't benefit Syrians. And I think that's part of what we've been seeing from Israel, especially in the early days after the fall of Assad. But we're continuing to see, to a certain degree, Israel has not left the areas that it's occupied, for example. But I think also, and you touched on this a bit, Redwan, but the sort of instigating sectarian division within Syria. I don't think that, and all of you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from when I lived in Syria didn't strike me as a particularly divisive country living there, or sectarian in the way that other places I've lived are. And so I don't think that that's inevitable. And I think people need to hear that a lot more outside of Syria and outside of the region, because I think that there is a kind of inevitability in terms of the Iraq model or what happened in Lebanon, et cetera, that I don't think is inherently an issue necessarily in Syria, but it can be instigated, I think, from beyond. There are desperate people because of a broken economy and because of years of war. And I think it's easy for some people to be, bought off and sort of create division within the country. Now, I think one of the most important things that President Trump's, I think, new momentum on Syria and Barack's, speeches about Syria is that I think even in their rhetoric, they've kind of kept a lot of those nefarious forces at bay. But of course, we're still going to see that, as time goes on, as Syria fades from the headlines, it already has. And I just don't want people to think that whatever division might happen, whatever splinter groups might happen, that this was not inevitable, that, this stems from an effort to address the concerns of Syrians right now with the current government or even their local governments, with basic services and how they're, developing equitably. Because right now the needs are so incredibly high and there's just simply not enough to go around. And so to find ourselves in the exact same place we were in Syria in 2010 would be, I can't even envision more of a catastrophe, right? After Syrians have been through so much, to slip back into war. And so I do hope that regional powers understand that an unstable Syria, which even looks like a keystone in the region, that is going to be necessary for regional integration and stability, not just in the region, but beyond, as we saw with the refugee crisis during the war, that they'll understand that, you know, a stable Syria that addresses the concerns and needs and wants of the population is better for everybody than any kind of alternative. But that said, again, I don't think that all of the regional countries are quite there, and perhaps not even members of the Republican Party or those in DC. So we'll have to be in wait and see mode on that. But I think really emphasizing the need for a stable and prosperous Syria, and that it will lead to more prosperity elsewhere in the region is really vital. But I just one point, because Marwan mentioned something about normalization with Israel being easy. I don't think it's easy. I don't even think it's possible. I think, you know, I think Trump understands that, which is why we've seen a lot of talk about a security pact. But there's also been discussions about Ahmed al-Shara meeting with Netanyahu, which I think even that would be problematic, I think, for a new Syrian government, given the occupation of Syrian lands, given what's going on in Gaza, all of those various things. I don't even think the Israeli government particularly wants to normalize with this government either. So I just wanted to address that.
Thank you, Natasha. Now, my question to Adam. It's clear now, 6 months after the fall of the Assad regime, that there is a need assessment by the World Bank that there is a need of more than $400 billion, at least $900 million just for to take off the ruins of the destruction happened in every country around the world, around Syria. But at the same time, you mentioned only available a few $millions on the hands of the UN. That's a huge, of course. And during my presence in Syria, I saw that there is the collapse of the middle class. 90% of the Syrian under poverty line, which their focus on the need on water and food, and are unable actually to contribute politically or contribute into building the state institutions, where there is too many areas they need. And this is why I think if this continue, where there is too much crisis around the world, Gaza, Ukraine, and others, I don't think the international community will pay any attention to what's going on in Syria right now, because there is no, at least the urgent need, there is no focus on the media, on the humanitarian issue, rather than it's up to the Syrian to deal with the legacy, which will legacy beyond their imagination or capacity. What do you think the best option, the best scenario for the new Syrian government to deal with such legacy at the same time with the low, let's say, lack of resources in their hands?
Well, thank you, Radwan. Those are many questions in one. But let me just see that on our part, we are trying to do everything we can to keep Syria on the world's radar screen. Just over the past 24 hours, I did an interview with the BBC and Al Jazeera. And I have a few lined up for the rest of the week. And we use all platforms, Twitter and LinkedIn and all the possible social media, just to keep the focus on Syria. But despite all of that, still the funding received for the humanitarian response is only 7.5% in the second half of the year. And that is alarming and unprecedented. Now, it is one of a few things that really keep me awake at night. It is because potentially, if the humanitarian crisis is left to fester, if people continue to suffer, all the happiness that followed the collapse of the Assad regime will dissipate. People will feel disappointed. Nothing has changed in their life. And that could lead to people expressing that disappointment in ways that could destabilize the country. That is my fear. So where should the government focus? I think Syria is not your typical humanitarian crisis. This is not Darfur, where I come from, or Somalia, or where you need to focus more on relief. Here, you need to invest more in creating the conditions for the people to recover their ability to rebuild their lives. i.e., you need to invest in the resuscitation of the social services. That is health, education, water and sanitation, and maybe micro grants for people to start livelihoods projects. And the lady panelist, Shorbaji, talked about this very eloquently. And that is what the Syrians need, to be enabled, to be empowered. And she used the word empowerment several times. And this is very important, and it should be seen as the most strategic approach to dealing with the humanitarian situation in Syria. But now, one key factor that could make all of this happen is to have the civil society itself, okay, come together and push the government, and also push other side, the private sector and the international community and so on, to direct all of these energies in ways that would alleviate the suffering of the people, but also accelerate the recovery of the country. And since I have the floor, I am itching to comment on a few things that other panelists said, but very quickly, because I have to go also somewhere else. The parallels with Iraq are unmistakable, unfortunately, despite the fact that all the people I talk to here from the government don't want to hear that. They don't want to be seen, the situation here as anywhere similar to Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein. But look, this government has all but changed the civil service. Also, it disbanded all the security forces without a proper DDRR process. That is a danger, and it is unnecessary. It could be done very methodically, scientifically, okay, and diffuse that potential threat to the transition. And I can't understand why this is not being done. Also, I am not clear about how the whole issue of transitional justice is going to be dealt with. It is something that I feel very strongly about, given my own background as a human rights lawyer. But again, if it is not managed carefully and adequately, it could end up becoming a victor's justice. And here, again, there is a big role for civil society to play. And lastly, Natasha referred to Trump's attitude as transactional, and that is something that everybody agrees upon. And that's exactly what we don't need for Syria. We need a principled foreign policy that would help this government enshrine into law and practice certain things, such as the equality of the citizens, degree of transparency, rebuilding the state institutions in an inclusive manner, restoring the social fabric that the Assad regime has damaged so badly, and so on and so forth. For that, you need a principled foreign policy by a power such as the United States. And I do hope that there are people somewhere in the State Department or in the National Security Council or somewhere who would inject that element of principle in this foreign policy. I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Now my question to Marwan. You touched base about the identity of the Syrian state and the sectarian card or the sectarian division who's been unfortunately risen in the last few months. The question now between Syria, and there is a one question regarding 225543, the Security Council resolution, the implementation of this such Security Council resolution. You will see such implementation. And the question, what the model they can Syria build for the political structure or the political system. At the same time, they don't want to go through Iraq and Lebanon as a model power sharing between the different sects, which every Syrian agrees on. It can be a source of violence and division and the failure of the political system. But at the same time, they have to look for their model to be able to be inclusive, to be able to equip every concern that the minorities they have, the Christian, the Druze, the Alawites, and to be able to show the Syrians that the country is not only united, but also the people are united and looking forward and dealing with the past in a matter of transitional justice, dealing with the past on a matter of dealing of a harsh legacy is not blamed to the sectarian group rather than to blame individuals who are responsible on the war crimes and crimes against humanity happened in the past. Marwan.
Very well, thank you, Radwan. I'm afraid I have to agree with Adam on his fears that we are repeating exactly the same mistakes that have been actually done in Iraq after the US invasion in 2003. Although Ahmed al-Shara, I still remember him in his first interview with Al Arabiya, he said that I lived in Iraq for many years. I don't want actually to repeat the Iraqi scenario in Syria, but yet he's taking every single step leading to the Iraqi scenario in Syria, including the dismantling of the state bureaucracy. And my fear is that also the sort of exclusion of many many sectors of Syrian society, unfortunately. I hope this is not something deliberate by the new government. But I see that important segments of Syrian society actually they don't see that this government is representing them. In fact, and we could see this not only concerning the minorities, the Alawite, the Druze, part of the Christians, and others, the Kurds as well. Syria Democratic Forces is also a strong critic of the Syrian regime, but also part of the Sunni society in Syria. They don't see this government representing them. And the reason for that, I believe, that the political process, if we have to agree that there is a political process in Syria in the first place, because many people, of course, also, they doubted very much that there is a political process in Syria. But if we agree that there is one, it was from the very beginning, it took the wrong moves, starting with the National Dialogue Conference, which was very much ceremonial, rather than something real. There was little actually dialogue, national dialogue, in the National Dialogue Congress that have been actually organized by the new government, and many believes actually that was mainly a facade, just like something to convince the international community that there is something political taking place in Syria. And then we have seen it also in the constitutional declaration, the temporary constitution that was signed by Ahmed al-Shara on March 13. We have also seen it by the concentration of powers. I have not seen a single, including Hafez al-Assad, a single Syrian leader that has accumulated so much power in his hand compared to Ahmed al-Shara. He's the executive power. He appoints the legislative branch of government, and he is also the head of the judiciary in Syria. So almost everything actually is concentrated. All powers are concentrated in the hands of Ahmed al-Shara. And this is why so many Syrians actually believing that they are absolutely excluded. That even if you think about the committees that has been formed, whether concerning the constitution or concerning the organization of the National Dialogue Conference, or the committee which has been actually been responsible for the selection of the deputies for the new assembly in Syria. Even this committee for many Syrians is not representative. These people have been selected mainly, and the government as well, because we see that the key ministries within the government are mainly taken by either Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or people close to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And we all know also that the real power is not in the hands of the ministers, but rather it's in the hands of, I can see now, I don't want to look very much pessimistic about the situation in Syria, but I'm trying to describe it as much as I believe close to reality. The real power is not in the hands of as we all know, in the hands of the new government. The real power actually lies somewhere else, somewhere around the presidential palace. So I believe that unless, and also there is Radwan, perhaps you know better than I do about the transitional justice, which is that the government has been dragging its feet on that as well. And had it not been to the huge pressure applied by Syrians in order to establish the Transitional Justice Committee, we would probably have not seen that. And also, you know, about these settlements with those who are considered by many Syrians as responsible for atrocities that have taken place over the course of the past decade in Syria. So I can talk about this for perhaps hours. What we need now, if we put all that aside, as important as they might be, I believe this government, especially in the light of what's taking place right now in Suwaida, and in the light what has taken place actually in the Syrian coast a few months ago, or what we are expecting to see in the future relationship with the Syrian Democratic Forces, with the SDF, and also with those who are not very happy with the policies of the new government. So I believe we need, if we are going to have a future for stable and prosperous Syria, I believe that we need to have a more inclusive policy adopted by the government of Ahmed al-Shara. We need to bring more Syrians actually to participate, because so many Syrians they feel the bitterness, including people who have participated in the first place in the Syrian revolution. So many revolutionary forces in Syria are so dismayed by the marginalization that have been the attitude of the government regarding them, marginalizing them in a very clear way, including the Syrian officers who have from the very beginning actually decided to dissent from the Syrian regime, and who have suffered a lot over the years actually because of that decision. They don't have a real place in the new government. So I believe that we need a fresh start, and I believe the new start in Syria, we should be calling actually for a new national dialogue conference, a real one, not something like the one that have been organized last February. We need to bring almost everybody with real representation in the Syrian society. We need to talk about a new constitution. We need to talk about who gets what in Syria. This is a very important issue right now. Without that, if we feel that there is a lack of justice concerning the sacrifices that have been made by so many Syrians over the past 14 years are not rewarded. I believe that's going to be also another big danger that is we are going to face in the road down the road, actually, over the next few months and years. And we have, in fact, this is my last point, and I believe that we have a lot to fear of in Syria. I don't believe that that, for example, if you control Suwaida, or if you take control of the coastal area, that would mean the end of the story. I believe that's not going to be the case. We are going to see so many challenges down the road unless we address them in a genuine way, in a genuine manner. I believe the future doesn't look very bright for Syria, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Marwan. My question to Adam, but we just got lost him. I think it's very important, Marwan, into this, give the government the benefit of the doubt. They still in the presidential balance less than 6 months. As we talk, the regional challenges are huge. The sanctions just lifted 3 months ago. The question of timing, of course, they need some time to deal with the legacy. They need to be able for the Syrian to be patient on some of the actions, especially in economic recovery, because of the situation in Syria. At the same time, of course, there is a lot of disappointment on the different appointments. It should be because rather than give inclusiveness feeling, it gives only symbolic to establish a commission for transitional justice, and then does not empower such commission to do its job. It's be more than symbolic rather than actually and a commission to do its business in justice and to deal with the legacy of human rights violations happened in the last 14 years. It all goes to priority. What's the priority for the Syrian government right now? To move forward into justice files, to move forward into more dealing with the large number of Syrian victims, or from its perspective, focus more on stability and security with all the challenges, with the lack of resources that they have in their hands. What do you think should priority of the Syrian government right now?
Well, Radwan, I have to agree with you that we have to give them more time. I absolutely agree with that. But we don't need more time actually to start like a real national dialogue in Syria. We can start it right now. We should have started this many months ago, actually. Had we done that before, real one, actually, we might not need to have like a problem in Suwaida or another problem in the coastal area or a third problem in the northeast, because exclusion is a major issue. For so many Syrians right now. Inclusiveness is not something that contradicts with actually dealing with other issues. The problem is that the government is giving more time and more efforts to the external actors while ignoring Syrians. Nobody is talking to the Syrians, by the way. Nobody is there is no real dialogue that is taking place right now between Syrians. Everybody is left like isolated in his own, I don't know, virtual world, perhaps. Nobody is talking to anybody. So, and also we don't need time concerning the functioning of the state, because for many of us, actually, the question was why so many state institutions are not after 6-7 months now since the Assad regime actually collapsed, are not functioning. The reason for that and the answer for that, as Adam said, is that there is a purge within the state institutions. We don't need to do that, actually, because all these qualified people who have been working at the bureaucracy of the state have been there for many decades. And what's the point, actually, of firing so many people within the bureaucracy of the state and replacing them with, I don't know, people who are more loyal to the new regime. This is not the way to rebuild the country. This is not the way actually to have a prosperous and peaceful future for Syria. You have to have everybody on board. Otherwise, people are thinking that this is not the Syria that we all dreamt of after the fall of the Assad regime. This is the country that is mainly established around what? The groups like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and allies who have brought down, because the slogan, Man yuharrir yuqarrar, those who liberated the country are entitled to take decisions, that is not going to work. And you know, and I know, that has been not only the slogan, it has been the policy since day one. So if we don't change this policy, I think things are not going to go well for Syria. Even if we solve the problem of Suwaida, even if we solve the problem of the Alawite, even if we solve the problem of the Syrian Democratic Forces in the northeast, I believe there will always be a problem within in the relationship between state and society in Syria. Unless we see the state as representative of all Syrians, I think the very legitimacy of this state, of this authority, of this government will be questioned in the coming months and years.
Okay, with such note, we'll finish our webinar. Thank you very much, Marwan. Thank you for Adam Abdel Mawla, Natasha, and Ms. Shurbaji, who unfortunately, because of the difficulties of the connection in Syria, we lost them. But I think was very an important discussion on the US-Syria relationship and what's the challenges of the new government in Syria regarding governance, security, humanitarian assistance. I think we all agree that we are on a peak of a very historical moment of the US-Syria relationship. President Trump took the right decision to lift all the sanctions to give Syria a chance, but it's now up to the Syrian to be able to put the right policies and the best governance system to be able to take advantage of this new historical moment. Thank you, Marwan, and thank you everyone who joined us, and hope to see you in the next webinar for the ECW. Thank